Good evening, all handheld fans and hunting RPG fans. Today I'm going to give you a review on the new God Eater game that's released in the West, but also a bit of a lesson. A lesson in release order changes between regions. In Japan, God Eater 2 Rage Burst released before God Eater Resurrection, and then the additions from Rage Burst were put into Resurrection as a remake of the original game. In the West, this was reversed. Was this a good or a bad thing? Well, you're about to find out. Here is my official review of the Vita version of God Eater 2 Rage Burst. Three years after the events of God Eater Burst, God Eater Resurrection, a separate branch of the Fenrir unit travels in a moving fortress. They're constantly running and fighting origami, strange creatures that suddenly appeared in the world and have brought humanity to the brink of extinction. Since the events of the first game, however, the origami have grown and evolved. They've gained the ability to control other origami and put a stop to the God Arc weapons that are humanity's only way to strike back against the origami. In response to this threat, there is a new unit called the Blood Unit. Using a hidden ability known as Blood Power, they can resist these growing and evolving abilities, letting humanity fight back, trying to end this conflict once and for all. The story of God Eater 2 is nice, especially for newcomers to the series, because it has a mix of new and old characters, but it also stands on its own 2 feet. You don't have to go through Resurrection to play Rage Burst. Just like previous games in the series, God Eater 2 Rage Burst is a hunting action RPG that has you running through limited environments, fighting off enemies and bosses with a party of characters in the hopes of slaying giant enemies and collecting materials to help better your equipment. First thing that anyone wants to know in a hunting RPG sequel: what has been added to the formula that makes the sequel unique aside from the storyline? And here is where our lesson begins. God Eater 2 released in Japan, and then all of the additions made to God Eater 2 were used when they remade the original game with Resurrection. The fact that Resurrection released first makes almost all of these new features in God Eater 2 not very new anymore, which really hampers the Western perspective on just how much they enhanced in God Eater 2. You still have a unique system called Blood Arts, which are unique to the story of God Eater 2. These allow you to use powerful attacks, not that different from Hunter Arts from the newly released Monster Hunter Generations. Now, past this, progression is going to be done between your base of operations and the field where you'll be taking part in missions. Your base has a few different areas. A couple rooms are for story purposes, but the main area has a reception desk for taking on missions, a vending machine for buying items, and some kiosks where you can customize your character and equipment. But the bulk of the game is going to be spent out in the field. Every mission has you out in a closed environment with a party of characters with the task of hunting down enemies and defeating them. Now, another thing we want to talk about is repetition. In many hunting RPGs, repetition is unavoidable, because you're always going to be going in, fighting enemies, and a lot of missions have you fighting the same enemies over and over and over again. You get this boss every couple missions, or this boss every 3 or 4 missions. It's going to get repetitive over time, because there aren't a million different boss types for you to fight. But the release schedule also adds to this repetition. It took me several hours before I reached an environment for a mission in God Eater 2 Rage Burst that wasn't recycled from the first game, especially Resurrection. This really just added to the repetitive feel of the game, and it felt like I was just going through recycled environments, mostly recycled enemies aside from the few new ones. It wasn't a good feeling, and this probably could have been avoided, and did get avoided in Japan, by releasing God Eater 2 before releasing Resurrection. Now, all of this downer for the release schedule doesn't mean the game isn't fun, because it is. It's got all of the intense and strategy heavy battles that the franchise is known for. It's just the fact that Resurrection being released beforehand in North America really hampers the quality of Rage Burst, especially when you look at the price differences. God Eater Resurrection was only $20, and Rage Burst is $40, at least on the PlayStation Vita. And this is further shown in the length. It took me about 30 to 40 hours to beat Resurrection, but it only took me about 20 to 30 hours to beat Rage Burst. This is still lengthy for a hunting RPG, but you just have to sit back and think about that difference along with the price for a moment. Now, as far as presentation is concerned, I have no complaints about the visuals. They look pretty sharp. There are a few jagged edges here and there, and they're definitely not as crisp as games like Freedom Wars, but it looks really nice. The only downer about the presentation is the audio quality. For some reason, the audio compression on voice data is so much lower than everything else. When I played the game, I had to almost mute everything except the voice with it and even with the voice at max volume and everything else really low, I could barely hear what people were saying during missions. God Eater 2 Rage Burst is a fun and intense journey. It's unfortunate that the audio compression and repetition issues from Resurrection's release window kind of hamper the experience a little bit, but that doesn't stop it from being a good game for any hunting fan. Reviews to Go rates God Eater 2 Rage Burst an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to my site at www.reviewstogo.com.